Foreign-born and homegrown players at the Rugby World Cup 2023, folks. We're going to go through all of the 33-man squads. Have a look. Which squads include the most foreign-born players, but maybe more importantly, which squads have got the most homegrown players? So who's going through your rugby system before representing another country? Homeborn and foreign-born is a little bit more kind of luck of the draw where your parents were when you were born, but homegrown I find very interesting, and yeah, we'll go through them. You guys can let us know your thoughts. I should say the source for all this information comes from the America's Rugby News. I'll put a link down in the description to that one. Paul Tate wrote up this massive article, which has got very much great details about all the players and how they qualify for countries and graphs and all kinds of whiz-bang fancy stuff. So much more detail than we're going to go through here. I suggest you check that out. Starting with the teams who are very straightforward to get by, Argentina and South Africa. All of your players were born in your country, and all of your players were trained in your country. So there's not really a lot to talk about for you guys. You guys are very, very straightforward. Namibia is 100% Namibian born. However, you do have a chunk of your players who trained in South Africa, and Richard Hardwick obviously trained in Australia. So he is kind of an exception to that rule. But yeah, pretty straightforward for Namibia in that regard. It makes geographical sense with South Africa being the main connection. Uruguay's got one guy born outside Uruguay, but the squad is 100% homegrown. So they are the same as Argentina and South Africa in that regard. Georgia have got one guy born outside Georgia and one guy trained outside Georgia. Shadikadze was born outside Georgia but trained in Georgia, and Chikoridze was born in Georgia but trained in France. So you're still looking at the vast majority of the squad being kind of Georgian connected. And even Chikoridze, who was trained in France, always had a connection with the Georgian Rugby Union and like youth level rugby and whatnot. So it's not like he was looking to represent France or anything like that. Speaking of France, they had 5 players at their last World Cup who were foreign-born. This World Cup, it's just 1. We're taking Willems out of the equation because he is no longer in the squad, so they are left with only Antonio as a kind of foreign-born player. He was born in New Zealand, trained in New Zealand, and then Flamand, despite the fact he was born in France, spent much of his youth in Belgium, so he kind of counts as a foreign-trained player, but you're still looking in the 90% for that squad. Chile is like Argentina. It's like South Africa, like Uruguay, and being 100% homegrown, although they did have 2 guys who were born overseas before moving back. That's why I kind of think where you're trained is maybe more impactful than where you're born, personally. Fiji is one where you've got a little bit more of a connection with overseas. They're the first side to kind of crack more than 10% of the squad not being born in the country. So 3 guys born in New Zealand, 1 guy born in England, 1 guy born in Australia. That's the likes of Muntz, Nthikitaveta, Tokitama, Matavesi, Nasilasila. But still, apart from those 4 guys qualifying through a parent and 1 through a grandparent, the vast majority of the squad has been born and raised in Fiji, which maybe, if you look at the fact that they could have picked a bunch of guys who've played for other countries who were, you know, Fijian born, they've not gone down that option. Their squad is still largely very local. England is one that's a little bit of an interesting split because they've got 6 of their guys who were born abroad, but only 1 of their guys who was trained abroad. So they're about as high as you can get, apart from Dave Ribbons being trained in South Africa. All these other guys like Bevan Rod, Marcus Smith, and Arundel, and Tuolangi, and Billy V, and whatnot, who were all born outside England, were trained in England. So that's what I mean also about where you trained perhaps being more important than where you were given birth to. Australia shows a bit of a New Zealand connection. I'm from this part of the world in New Zealand, so I am not surprised that 3 of their players were born in New Zealand but raised in Australia, because New Zealanders leave for Australia every day. There's better economic opportunities for New Zealanders in Australia oftentimes. So Ulysses Skelton and Foketi, all New Zealand born but Aussie raised. They've only got 3 guys who qualify as kind of overseas trained, and that's the likes of Tupou, Vunivalu, and Korombetu, who essentially all came to Australia late enough in the piece that it was to play professional rugby. They didn't grow up in Australia. Ireland, they've also got a few guys who qualified through the kind of wanting to play professional rugby thing. That's like Gibson Park, James Lowe, and Bundy Aki. Those are your 3 Kiwis. The majority of their squad has at least some kind of family connection, like Mac Hansen, whilst being raised in Australia, has an Irish parent. Rob Herring and Finlay Beelan with South African and Australian connections also have Irish grandparents. And then they've also got Tom O'Toole, who was born in Ireland to Irish parents but raised in Australia. So he's also got an Australian connection, but 8 of the squad born abroad, a couple of guys born in the US moving back to Ireland as kids, and 7 of the squad trained abroad. So you're still looking at 80% of the squad that's kind of homegrown in the Irish system. New Zealand have got 9 guys born abroad, which is higher than Ireland, but only 3 of the guys which were trained abroad. That's lower than some of the other countries we've talked about. So more than 90% of the squad's gone through the New Zealand system. So the guys who've been born abroad and trained abroad are the likes of Tyrell Lomax, whose dad represented New Zealand at Rugby League, but he was essentially through the Aussie system and could have represented the Wallabies, came very close to representing the Wallabies. Frizzell went through the Tongan system and Narawa through the Fijian system. Some of the other guys came to New Zealand at a much younger age. The likes of Lester Fainganuku, born in Tonga, came to New Zealand at 2. Finlay Christie, born in Scotland, came to New Zealand at 7. There's a couple of guys who are a little bit more borderline, like Taukeiaho and Tuangafasi, who came to New Zealand as kind of young teenagers, 14 and 16. So you could kind of decide where you want to draw the line. If you moved somewhere at 16, should you be representing your old home or should you be representing your new home? Ultimately, it's the decision of the player. But yeah, those guys are still counted as homegrown. So as I said, it is the 3 non-homegrown players for New Zealand in that regard. Wales, 10 guys foreign born, but the UK gets a bit messy with the England connection. And I imagine that places like Wales and Scotland see people in Northern Ireland, see people moving to England for work opportunities. That would probably make sense to me. I'm assuming it's like New Zealanders moving to Australia, but correct me if I'm wrong. George North and Dan Lydiate, born in England, moving back to Wales at a young age. Chiunza and Faletau, born in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Tonga, but moving to Wales at a young age, so still homegrown players. So it's just 6 players from Wales that didn't go through the Welsh system. There's a few of them that did represent other countries at various levels, like Henry Thomas played for England, Anscombe played New Zealand under 20s, Johnny Williams and Nick Tompkins represented England at various stages of their careers, but not at kind of a full international level in a test match anyway. So yeah, 10 and 6 for the Welsh, parent being the main qualifier for them. For the guys not born in Wales, 6 of them had Welsh parents. Portugal's got a very strong French connection with 10 guys being born in France, 10 guys being trained in France, but having 10 Portuguese parents. So, yeah, 30% of the Portuguese squad is French with Portuguese parents. So, that's a pretty straightforward one. Nothing much to go in terms of drilling down on details there. Romania is an interesting one because from what I've heard from people who are much more au fait with Romanian rugby than me, Romanian rugby domestically is not in the greatest of places, and maybe that shows in the amount of guys they've had to import for this World Cup. It was 4 guys at the 2015 World Cup who were foreign born, whereas we've got triple that. It's 12 guys at this World Cup who are foreign born, so you've got 4 Tongans, 4 Frenchmen, a couple of Kiwis, there's a Moldovan who switched allegiance. So yeah, is that a bit troubling for the domestic game in Romania? You guys who are more kind of in touch with that topic will have to let me know. But 6 guys qualifying on residency, 6 guys qualifying with Romanian parents. Italy are the main users of the grandparent category, with 6 of their players having an Italian grandparent. But some of the guys who are foreign born still have maintained a strong Italian connection, like Caputo, Negri and Brex, none of whom were born in Italy, all played under 20s rugby for Italy, so have clearly always maintained a connection with Italy. They do have some residency guys, 3 of them, the likes of Ioane, Faiva and Halafihi, who have Aussie and New Zealand connections, and then there's a few guys with English and French and Argentinian connections in that squad as well. For Scotland, again, it's the UK, so you can expect to see a few English names here, the likes of Ben White and Hamish Watson and Chris Harris and whatnot, all kind of born and raised in England, went through the English system. This is the closest one where we get to where it's around about a 50-50 split. So 45% of the squad was foreign born and 48% of the squad is foreign raised. So it's it's around about that kind of balance. I guess Scotland only has 2 professional teams, kind of similar to Italy, so it makes sense that the kind of net is drawn a little bit wider. But most of these guys have a blood connection with Scotland. 7 of them have got Scottish parents, 5 of them have got Scottish grandparents, and I said it's only the 3 guys who qualify on residency. That's 3 of the South Africans, Nel, Van der Merwe, and Schoeman. So 5 from England, 4 from South Africa, 2 from Australia. Yeah, there's a couple of guys like Tuipulotu came back to Scotland, if you can call it back, to play rugby and whatnot, with an eye on getting a Scottish cap, but he's got a Scottish granny. So Yeah, that's the Scotland squad. Above them is Japan, and if Italy was using grandparents as their main one, for Japan it's residency. They've got 16 guys who qualify on residency, which is more than double anybody else. So the majority of their squad, just 52%, is foreign born. However, only 30% of their squad is foreign raised, because many of these guys came to Japan at a young enough age that they've essentially gone through the Japanese system, despite the fact they might not have a Japanese name. So that's the likes of Warner Durns, Ivalu, Gu, all these guys came to Japan age like 14 or 15, so really, really young in the piece. Some of the guys obviously came to play professional rugby, Lapis Lapaskakni, Masarewa, Miller, all these guys, these guys are more of the kind of stereotype, but I think the fact that it's 70-30 on homegrown, guys going through the Japanese system, highlights that maybe it's not quite the stereotype that's true. Tonga is the second most for foreign born, with 61% of the squad being born outside Tonga and 70% of the squad being trained outside Tonga. They've had a few guys switch allegiances from previous countries to Tonga. That's the likes of Piatau, Moala, Pulu, Aki from New Zealand. But remember, these guys are all New Zealand born guys, so it's not like they're going back to Tonga. But there are some guys who are going back to Tonga, the likes of Fekitoa and Fafita, who did play for New Zealand despite going through the Tongan system. So maybe that's one good example of the kind of system working for those guys who aren't in the All Blacks anymore to go back to their home country. Coleman also represented the Wallabies, and he's now going to represent Tonga as well. 19 of those guys have got a Tongan parent. That's how they qualify. That's the second most of any of the squads in terms of using a parent as the qualification method, and 16 of them are from New Zealand. So around about half of that Tongan squad was born in New Zealand. Just under 4 of them from Australia. And then Samoa is the number 1 squad for foreign born. So you've got 24 guys born abroad, of which 17 are Kiwis and 7 are Aussies. So there's definitely a big connection between the Pacific and Australia and New Zealand. We're in that part of the world, so it totally makes sense. As much as New Zealanders leave to Australia to get jobs, many Tongans and Samoans come to New Zealand to get jobs, and Australia as well. This is just kind of economic immigration, isn't it? Immigration. But yeah, 85% of the Samoan squad was trained abroad. They've only got 5 guys who were born and raised in Samoa. That's Whailangi, Lee, McFarland, Manu, and Matavao. You'd hope with Moana Pacifica in Super Rugby, like the likes of a Miracle Whailangi is a great example of how that team can work. You would like to see in future those numbers going up, and kind of maybe fewer guys who are born and raised in New Zealand representing Samoa. But as I said, they do have that blood connection with 22 of them, only 2 of them using a grandparent, and none of them for either Tonga or Samoa using residency. So yes, Samoa tops the bunch for foreign born and raised players, and it's the likes of Argentina and South Africa who are at the opposite end of the spectrum. Which country is the biggest exporter of players? Well, 57 of them are from New Zealand, so it's New Zealand. Second is France and Australia with 17 each. Remember, 10 of those French guys are in the French connected guys are in the Portuguese squad. 15 each for England and Tonga. 9 for South Africa, 6 for Fiji, 3 for Argentina, and 2 or less for multiple other places. What do we make of all this? Eligibility laws seem to be something of a hot button issue. Everyone seems to have a slightly different take. Do you just go with World Rugby's thing? You can be born there, you can have a parent from there, you can have a grandparent from there, or now you can do 5 years residency. Would you like to see residency extended longer than 5 years? Is 5 years not enough? Is 5 years about right? Is the connection to a grandparent, if you've never ever been to that country, is that too far away? Should it just be parents? As I said, everyone seems to have a bit of a different take on it. I have 2 children. They were born in 2 different countries. One of them was born in China. If you want to see me going around China, I did that earlier in the year. I talked to Chinese people and stuff. It was something genuinely a bit different and genuinely not rugby. But yeah, there's been people who've moved for economic reasons. There's people who move for political reasons. There's people move for don't even move. They just get born there because their parents were there at that time. So yeah, there's lots of interesting examples. You guys let us know your thoughts on it. Check out Paul's article down in the description. And yeah, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.